With Penn State taking on Indiana this weekend, we wanted to reach out to our old friend of the podcast, Jack Grossman, host of the Crimson Coverage podcast from ESPN Louisville, to come on and talk some Penn State, Indiana. This is the Locked On Nittany Lions podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into today's edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. It is another episode where we are going to help get you set for everything going down this weekend when Penn State plays host to the Indiana Hoosiers. A big revenge game situation for the Nittany Lions. Regardless, it is a big game as we jump back into the thick of Big Ten play from here on out. And what better way to jump back into conference play than against a division opponent, which of course is the Indiana Hoosiers, who of course started Penn State's 2020 season on the completely wrong foot. We'll get into all of that and a whole lot more and get an idea of what to expect out of Indiana as we talk to today's guest, Jack Grossman, the host of the Crimson Coverage podcast from ESPN Louisville. We had him on the podcast a year ago. We wanted to bring him back on. I was also a guest on his podcast earlier this week too, so make sure you hop on over to the Crimson Coverage podcast and hear some of the things that I had to say, answering some of his questions. But before we get into our interview today with Jack, I want to remind you that you can also check out our crossover episode that we did with Jacob Rude, host of the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. That's also live today. And of course, make sure you never miss a single episode of Locked On Nittany Lions by giving this podcast a follow on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your Locked On podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every day. And of course, you can check us out on YouTube. If you are watching this video on YouTube, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Let us know some of your thoughts for this upcoming weekend's game between Penn State and Indiana. We will get back to the YouTube comment of the day very soon, but due to the schedule that's going on right now, I haven't had a chance to keep up with all the YouTube comments you guys are supplying me. So I do thank you guys for the feedback and the comments. Let's keep them coming because they are really fun to read. I will eventually read all of them and maybe throw in some of the best comments of the day for an upcoming podcast. But please, thank you so much for the feedback. We're having a lot of fun on YouTube, but of course we're having a lot of fun just putting this podcast out there and making it as accessible as we possibly can. So however you get this podcast, whether you listen to it or watch it, thank you so much again for making us your first listen. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at Locked On Nittany, and don't forget our Facebook page at facebook.com/LockedOnNittany. I'm gonna hold off anymore. Let's dive into our interview with our good friend Jack Grossman. All right, with Penn State taking on Indiana this weekend, we had to reach out to our old friend Jack Grossman, a producer from ESPN Louisville, host of the Crimson Coverage pod covering all things Indiana. Jack, how's it going, man?
Oh, I am fantastic, Kevin. Thanks for having me on again. Always happy to come on, talk some Indiana Penn State football, and just having a blast, man. Cannot complain at all.
Well, obviously, if you are a longtime listener to Locked On Nittany Lions, you may remember Jack came on before the last season started, the 2020 season, the delayed start to this 2020 season. Penn State fans know exactly how that all played out, but nobody predicted Indiana would actually win that game, right, Jack?
I do not remember picking Indiana to win the game. I'm pretty sure I did not pick them to win the game. I thought they would have a chance, but I thought they'd beat Wisconsin, but I did not have them beating Penn State. I'm pretty sure that's how that went.
I actually don't remember if you officially predicted Indiana to win, but you were on record saying that Indiana was probably going to have a really good season. And I was a little skeptical, I will admit, but you know what? I was enjoying the ride that Indiana had after that first game of the season. You know, I was a little bitter about that, but I do think that what we saw out of Indiana was really fun to watch from an outsider point of view of no real rooting vested interest in Indiana. It didn't hurt that it didn't, Penn State was stinky last season for a while, but so that's why I enjoyed watching Indiana had the success they did. I've already said, I think Indiana should have been in a better bowl game, but regardless, here we are. Okay. Penn State, Indiana, getting back on the football field once again this season, this weekend in prime time. It's going to be a nationally televised game, primetime atmosphere. When I saw that Penn State and Indiana was a primetime game, I know I was a little taken back. I figured, well, this must be a weekend of college football. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but what was your reaction when you saw that Indiana is going to be taking on Penn State in prime time this weekend?
To be honest, it was because that's a time slot for Indiana football, and you're someone who follows Indiana football. That like Indiana's never prime time on ABC. at 7:30 at night. That never happens. But honestly, the first thought was, because it was right after, I believe, that Indiana lost Cincinnati, dropped to 1-2. It was like, oh, so that's the one that's going to be on prime time on ABC. So it's very much been a different feeling so far in 2021, really, since, the first 2 minutes and 15 seconds of the Iowa game when Indiana's down 14-0 and it never threatened at all in that game. But it's still a really big stage for Indiana. It's a stage that Indiana's not used to being on, and it's a great opportunity for Indiana to, I don't think they're going to win the game, but to play better than they did, obviously, in the Iowa game. And Cincinnati, which is a game that they played well enough to win the game. I thought they were the better team for most of the game, but they did Indiana football things and blew the game on multiple levels. But the first initial thought was, oh, that might be bad. But it's definitely still really exciting for Indiana to be 7:30 p.m. on ABC against a name brand like Penn State.
Yeah, it should be pretty cool. Obviously, there are a lot of people that follow Penn State that are really looking forward to this game because of what happened last season, but also because Penn State's been getting off to a pretty good start. They get another primetime game. Some people are a little worried. Are they going to look past Indiana because Iowa's coming up with a road game next weekend? I have to say, I can't see Penn State, given what happened last season, looking past Indiana. What's the vibe around the Hoosiers right now heading into this game? What are people saying about this particular matchup? I do have some questions about Indiana's season up to this point, though, but just kind of walk me through what people are thinking about going into this game.
It's a very mixed feeling for Indiana football right now, because going in to the season, obviously you're riding the high of the 2020 season. You get Michael Penix back off injury. And to just lay such a gigantic dud against Iowa, to where, all that hype for months and months and months, and then literally 2 minutes, 15 seconds into the game, you've given up a long touchdown run and thrown a pick six. And the game was over from that point. Indiana didn't play particularly great, especially offensively after that, but the game's over when you're down 14-0 that early to Iowa. You just to control the ball the rest of the game. And to lose Cincinnati doesn't help matters either. It's very much people are trying to figure out how to feel about IU football at the moment. It's not the normal where, you lose a couple games during the season and people just jump straight to basketball, which IU basketball media day was on Monday, so people have talked a little bit of basketball this week, but it's not quite to that, but it's to the point where people are just kind of in limbo on how they kind of feel about the team at the moment because of the Iowa game. That's the biggest thing. It's because of the Iowa game and because of the fact that other than the Western Kentucky game, Michael Penix hadn't played great or good even.
Another weekend of college football is on tap, and of course, now's a good time to start taking a look at some of those betting lines that you're going to find on betonline.ag. Betonline.ag's got you covered with all the odds, all the props, and even futures bets for college football, the NFL, Major League Baseball postseason right around the corner, so lots of stuff to keep you interested over on BetOnline. Penn State's a 2-score favorite against the Indiana Hoosiers, so if you're liking those chances there, maybe place a couple bucks on your brand new account on BetOnline. You can sign up for absolutely free, no commitment financially to sign up for an account on BetOnline. Just go to betonline.ag and sign up for the account. Then when you make your first deposit into that account, make sure you use the promo code NFL100, and BetOnline is going to give you a 100% welcome bonus on top of whatever your first deposit is. No limit to that. You want to take advantage of that opportunity because nobody else is going to give you that kind of a deal. That's free money to get started wagering on some college football and other NFL action this weekend. So make sure you take advantage of that. Head on over to betonline.ag, sign up for that account, and use the promo code NFL100. Get that 100% welcome bonus on top of your initial deposit for this coming weekend. That's why BetOnline are your online sportsbook experts. Quick question about Michael Penix. Is he 100% or is he still kind of coming off of the injury that he had last year? What is the story there?
It's a great question. Everything that we hear says that he's 100%, but if you look at him, the Washington Kentucky game was the first game that he really looked anything like the Michael Penix that we saw in 2020 or in 2019 before that it was the first time that he really had looked comfortable in the pocket, looked in rhythm, was able to be extremely accurate, hit a couple of not huge deep shots, but, some passes 25, 30 yards down the field, was able to actually, stand back there and make plays. And part of that might have been just because it's Iowa and Cincinnati. Indiana's O-line was just so overwhelmed that he was running for his life the entire time. And Western got to him a couple of times in that game, still against WKU, to where that's not great for the offensive line either. But you look at the Idaho game, Indiana's plan was, I thought that was a game where, you take the beating against Iowa, you have the big game against Cincy coming up, you let Michael Penix get comfortable, make some easy throws, get into a rhythm, have a big day. And then Indiana just basically ran the ball up the middle against an FCS team for 60 minutes. I mean, Penix only threw the ball 11 total times in that game. It was extremely bland. I was a little bit disappointed in the fact that, look, you got to get him chargeable at some point because, as I get it, they finally did do it against Western, but I felt like if they would have let him do a little bit more, maybe he wasn't ready to do enough yet, which is a question mark also. But if he's 100%, you would think he would be ready. So it's just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of just uncomfortable feelings about Michael Penix and his play. Because it was pretty bad for 3 weeks. It really was. But obviously, I think a lot of people feel better about him after the Western game because he goes out, throws for 373 yards, completes 67% of his passes. It could have been a lot more of a one for a couple of drops from the receivers. So you feel like there were people calling for Jack Tuttle to start over Penix. In the Cincinnati game, in the Western Kentucky game, I was never on that boat. I'm like, just because Penix has that potential that Jack Tuttle he's a nice guy. He's not going to lose a game to Indiana. Won at Wisconsin with Jack Tuttle as the quarterback last year. But if you think about that game, they won. Tuttle didn't lose them the game by any means, but they won that game because the defense only gave up 6 points. That's why they won the game. They won the game 14-6. The defense won them that game in Madison, to where you're not going to lose a game with Jack Tuttle, but if you're going to be able to go to a Penn State and win, which Indiana has quite literally never done, or beat an Ohio State for the first time since 1987, try to go to the Big House and win there for the first time since 1968, to try to beat a ranked Michigan State team, have a third straight winning season for the first time since 1947 with the schedule that Indiana has. You need a guy that yes, Michael Penix was a big reason why Indiana lost the Cincinnati game. He was one of the biggest reasons. But you need to have a guy that has the potential to go out and win big games and play great against really good teams. And Michael Penix, not really in the Penn State game last year, except for the very end of it, he was quite bad for most of that game, to be honest. But Michael Penix against Ohio State last year on the road, against Michigan at home, against Michigan State in 2019, a team that had the number one defense in the country at that point. Penix had a Big Ten record for consecutive completions in a game in that game against that Michigan State defense. So to be able to have any shot at beating any of these really, really good teams that Indiana is going to face the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, starting with this game at Penn State, the only chance you have to win is if Michael Penix is your quarterback. And I think what we saw against Western, I'm sorry to be long-winded on this, but what we saw against Western Kentucky was that, yes, I get it. It's just Western Kentucky. The reason that game was close was because of what they did offensively. Their defense isn't very good. But you saw, okay, he has the potential to still get to where he was before the torn ACL last season.
What about the supporting cast around Michael Penix here? Who are Penn State fans who should be aware of this weekend, especially on the offensive side? Obviously, there's a pretty good running back, but he's not having the kind of season that I think a lot of people are expecting either.
Yeah, Stephen Carr's he had a really good game against Western, over 100 yards, a couple of touchdowns, but he was obviously a former USC guy, transferred over to Indiana, 5-star recruit back in the day. And he's up his way. I think he's been good. The stats don't really show it just because the offensive line hasn't helped him out at all. The Western game and the Idaho game, they were able to get some push run blocking wise, but I mean, like, that's Idaho and Western Kentucky. So I mean, like what's that really going to do?
Yeah. What do you do against those teams versus what do you do against Iowa and Cincinnati? Yeah. Obviously, a big difference in competition there.
Yeah. So for a quarter plus, Indiana was able to run the ball in Cincinnati. And then they got dominated on the line the rest of the game. And obviously the Iowa game, they were thoroughly dominated on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball for the entire game. So it's not really as much of a Stephen Carr issue. And we saw this last year with Stevie Scott as well, who was another really good back who probably made a mistake by leaving early. But I mean, with that O-line, maybe he should have, transferred to another school just to try to get somewhere where you could try to get an O-line that has more of a push. But Indiana's had talented running backs. They just have nowhere to run. And that's been a big issue for them, especially when they're playing really good teams. You look at, even the games that they've won, Indiana threw the ball 50 times against Michigan last year. That's because they couldn't run the ball. They threw the ball a crap ton against Ohio State last year. They threw the ball a lot against Cincinnati, even though Michael Penix wasn't very comfortable doing it. So, I mean, they're going to throw the ball a lot. And they have weapons on the outside. They did lose a big one, though, last week. DJ Matthews, the Florida State transfer, towards ACL against Western Kentucky. He's out for the rest of the year, obviously, but he's a guy that, if you remember, for the past couple of years, Indiana had Wap Fillier, who was a really speedy guy, slot receiver, really complimented, Ty Freifogel, Miles Marshall, Peyton Hendershot, kind of, the big physical receivers that Indiana has around them. DJ Matthews had kind of become that guy. Well, not kind of, he was that guy for Indiana this year, who was basically brought in to fill in for Wap Fillier, who went to the NFL, who's with the Vikings now. So losing him's a big blow. He was really, the only guy to really get going in Cincinnati in that game. Penn was able to find him a couple of times. He looked really good in that game. Going out to Cincinnati, you felt confident in really about one thing offensively, that was Indiana finding DJ Matthews. And now you don't have that option for the rest of the season. You have Big Ten wide receiver of the year from last year, Ty Freifogel, who really, really struggled with drops in the Cincinnati game. Penix did show he was bad in the Cincinnati game, don't get me wrong, but he showed some flashes of the guy that he was a year ago that he really showed more of against Western. And one of them was he had a perfect pass to Freifogel that would have been about a 60-yard touchdown. Freifogel just dropped it. So, I mean, and Freifogel dropped 3rd and 15 that would have been, converting a first down. That was a really big one. So he had 2, 3, 4 really bad drops in the Cincinnati game. He had a couple of drops in the Western game as well. Though, to his credit, he did come back. IU facing a 3rd and 8 with about a minute and a half left, only up to needing to convert a 3rd down to end the game. Penix found Freifogel to end the game. He made a nice catch on an accurate throw on an in route. So, I mean, you got that going for you. You feel like Freifogel should be fine. Miles Marshall is a guy that's pretty good on the outside as well. Peyton Hendershot, the tight ends, had a really nice bounce back year. He struggled a lot with drops in 2020. He's kind of been a security blanket for Penix on the flat. They've done a good job finding him. They found him over the middle as well. And yeah, that pretty much covers it. You got guys like Cameron Buckley, Texas A&M transfer. He's going to have to kind of fill in for Matthews now. Javon Swin, who's a redshirt freshman, and Indiana has a lot of talent on the receiving core, but losing DJ Matthews does hurt them a lot.
If you're looking for a protein bar that actually tastes good and gets the job done, then you got to check out Built Bars. Built Bars are protein bars, but they taste just like chocolate bars. And if you do a comparison head to head versus other nationally leading protein bars that are out there, you're going to find that Built Bars are far and away the better alternative for you. Because they are healthy, they come in a variety of flavors. There's a little bit of something for everybody. They also have limited edition and seasonal flavors. So the next couple of months are going to be pretty busy for Built Bar fans. And if you have had a Built Bar, you understand what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, then what are you waiting for? Get in on the action. Built Bars. There's so many variety of flavors to choose from. Again, something for everybody. I personally like the orange. That's one of my personal favorites. But right now, they've got cookie dough chunk. It's a limited edition flavor, so you want to make sure you take advantage of that while you still can. Head on over to BuiltBar.com. See all the flavors they have available for you and start doing the comparisons yourself. And then, of course, when you're ready to place that first order from BuiltBar.com, make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll save yourself 15% off your first order from Built Bar. And you're going to keep coming back because you're going to find that Built Bars are going to be a part of your daily routine, just like they are mine. So if you haven't tried them yet, go ahead and give them a shot right now. You will not regret it. And that's why Built Bars are the best tasting protein bars out there. They taste just like chocolate bars, and right now you can save yourself 15% off by using the promo code LOCKED15 at BuiltBar.com. Yeah, there's no question. There are talented players on this Indiana team. Last season was not a fluke, as far as I'm concerned. It's just a matter of getting everything to be falling into place, which I think a lot of that did for Indiana last year. And it's just not there for whatever reason so far this season. Is it all going to come together this weekend against Penn State? I guess we'll find out, right? So, Jack, I got to say real quick, it's always good talking to you, first of all, but I want to get your quick take on how you think this weekend's game is going to go down. I'm not asking for a score prediction, but I do want to know how you think this game is going to play.
I mean, you got to buy into the revenge factor, right? I mean, that absolutely has to
think you do.
Be a thing. I think you absolutely have to. I just think, I'll put it this way. If Indiana plays its A game, which is a really, really, really big if, but if Indiana plays its A game and Penn State plays its A game, Penn State's more talented and they're going to win. I mean, like, that's just the reality of Indiana football. This is the last couple of years have been the most talent Indiana football's had in my lifetime, the most talent they've had since, the 1980s with Anthony Thompson and those teams under Bill Mallory. But at the end of the day, if Indiana's talent is playing at its best and Penn State's talent is playing at its best, Penn State is going to win the game. So for Indiana to win, like we saw, last year, like we've seen when Indiana's had big wins, I'm not taking anything away from Indiana. Obviously, the win against Penn State is probably the biggest win, one of the biggest wins in school history. The Michael Penix reach into the end zone for the pylon is the football version of the Christian Watford shot. It just is.
He was short, but he went out of bounds, but whatever.
I mean, the football breaks the plane. But we don't need to get into that. But that is right, wrong, or indifferent on that call. That is the iconic play for Indiana football now. It just is.
Let me just stop you right there. Say what you will about the play. It's a great image. It's a great football image.
Yeah,
it is probably the image of the 2020 season, as far as I'm concerned. It is an image that gets the skin to cringe a little bit every time I see it, but it is a classic image. So,
and I'm sorry to all the Penn State fans for me focusing on that for a moment, but
it's all good. It's all good.
But if you look at how Indiana can win the game, is their defense has to be chaotic. They have to find ways to pressure Sean Clifford, which is what they did a year ago, and they got to force turnovers. And they have to find a way to basically, have Penn State play a bad game. Like that's how Indiana would have to win the game. They would need Penn State to struggle and help them out, and they're going to need offensive coordinator Nick Sheridan to call a pretty good game, which is something that hadn't been great either. It was a lot better against Western Kentucky. I see if he can get some nice, easy throws to get Penix into a rhythm early to try to get him to play a good game. Even though Indiana won with Michael Penix not playing well last year, they need him to play a good game again. They need him to play well if they're going to have a chance to win this year.
I would tend to agree with that. I don't think Indiana stands a chance unless Michael Penix is going to play a good game. Turnover-free game certainly puts him in a much better position. I do think that Indiana is going to be competitive this weekend. I think that Penn State pulls away. I saw the line that I was looking at was Penn State minus 12. My initial thought was that seems a little high to me. But then I think I went on your podcast and I gave a score prediction of 31-17.
Yeah, by 2 touchdowns.
I'm just realizing this right now. I'm picking them to cover. So, I guess I'm going back. It's one of those things. My opinion on this game is probably going to change by the hour. I think that Penn State wins this game, but I do think that even if Penn State covers, I think Indiana is competitive. I think Penn State maybe just separates themselves a little bit towards the end of the game. So I'm looking forward to a good game.
I do say I think Indiana needs to get off to a good start because as you bring up with the revenge factor, with it being a night game in Happy Valley, a place that, again, quite literally, Indiana has never won in Happy Valley, in front of 100,000-ish fans there. With all the emotion going into it, you have to get off to a fast start. You can't dig yourself into a hole like you did against Iowa in week 1. And they did a really good job of that. They jumped out, dominated Cincinnati for the first 28-ish minutes of that game. Obviously, they needed to take advantage of more of those opportunities that they had against the Bearcats.
Yeah, unfortunately, you play 60 minutes in football, not 28. Yeah. So, that came back.
Yeah, and they left roughly 14 to 21 points on the board in the red zone in that game. That's why they lost that game. But Indiana has to get off to a fast start. They can't get beat early on in the game.
I would agree. Jack, pleasure talking to you once again. I look forward to doing it again. Remind the listeners here on Locked On Nittany Lions how they can get in touch with you. Anything you've got going on that you want to plug, the floor is yours, buddy.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Jack Grossman97. You got the Crimson Coverage podcast, which had Kevin on this week.
Yeah, check it out. It's a great episode.
Yeah, it was awesome getting all his thoughts on the game as well. We're talking everything IU football, IU basketball on that. And I produce The Take with Andy Sweeney, 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern on ESPN 680, 105.7 in Louisville, ESPNLouisville.com for anyone that is, as I would assume almost everyone would be in this case, out of market.
Absolutely. Jack, we will have the links to as much of that as possible in the show notes for this episode of the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll try to link down on in the comments down there below as well. So, Jack, best of luck to your Indiana Hoosiers this weekend. I hope not too much luck is needed, but I am looking forward to a game. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Always enjoy coming on, man. Appreciate you having me.
My thanks once again to Jack Grossman for hopping on and talking some Penn State, Indiana with me. Again, we will have the links to his podcast and how to follow him on Twitter in our show notes for this particular episode. So make sure if you're following us on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast, you check out the show notes for this episode, and we will get you links so you can go ahead and check out all the coverage that Jack has for you this weekend. Of course, if you want more Penn State, Indiana conversation, make sure you check out today's edition of The Crossover, where we teamed up with Jacob Root, host of the Locked On Hoosiers podcast, did a little crossover podcast between the two shows that is available for you on the podcast feed on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast, and of course over on our YouTube channel. So thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Maybe you're making us your first watch of the day as well by hopping over to our YouTube channel, giving us a thumbs up on the video and leaving a comment as you're watching the video, and of course making sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel so you get notified of every new video that comes across your YouTube feed. Thank you for making us a part of your YouTube consumption, as well as however you're getting the audio version of the podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On Nittany. Make sure you like our Facebook page at facebook.com/LockedOnNittany. And don't forget, we're also on Instagram at instagram.com/LockedOnNittany. My name is Kevin McGuire. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinOnCFB. And check out all of my Penn State coverage that we've got going on over on NittanyLionsWire.com, a part of the USA Today Sports Media Group. That's all for today's episode, but if you want to get the continuing coverage of everything that we've got going on across the Locked On Podcast Network, head on over to Locked On Bets right now, where your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling, they're going to give you their daily picks, their blowout specials, and a whole lot more heading into another weekend of football, both in the college game and the professional game. You know that is where you want to go to make sure you're making the best picks on betonline.ag. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Thank you for watching us on YouTube. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again to Jack Grossman. I will talk to you all again very soon.